Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
All right, welcome to the MuseCast. Happy Tuesday, everyone. What a glorious day to be alive, to be a part of the kingdom, to be tuning into the MuseCast with me, Dan Kent. Hey, Dan.
Hello.
And I'm Shawna Boren. Hi, Shawna. Saying hello to myself. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a nice, cooler day. I do like the hot days, but it's nice to have like a drop just for a day, just to kind of refresh, reset, and then bring on the heat again. So
I'm right there with you. Dan and I, we are just so simpatico with so many things, and weather would be one of them.
Yes.
It's nice to have a little bit of a break, and then we dive right into the sweltering heat. It's so good. So today is the break, and we're good. Dan, I'm so excited because tomorrow, our family gets to meet our little puppy Finnegan that we are adopting, and I can't wait.
Wow.
So sweet.
Finnegan.
Yes.
That's a great name.
Finnegan. I know, right? Name. So Finn will be his name. So this litter, so his mom, she went into a barn to have her litter and was trying to care for them as carefully as possible. And this rescue that we work with, they found her and the pups and everything. So for whatever reason, they gave all of them Star Wars names. And so originally our pup was called Han Solo, but there was another pup called Finn, and that I even preached a sermon on this. That is a character that we love in our family. So we're just going to do a quick little swappy poo because he's just 2 months old. So,
wow.
Little Finnegan.
Wow.
Finnegan Flynn Boren, if you really want to know, will be meeting us in person tomorrow, and then he'll be home with us in a couple of weeks. So we're super excited. Happy summer to us.
Yeah. What kind and what color is Finnegan?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So Finnegan is a Shepherd Lab mix, so Shepherd Labrador Retriever mix. Yeah. And he's black, but he has these beautiful big white paws and little white markings down his nose, chin, and chest. So, and he outweighs the rest of his litter mates by a few ounces. Of course he does. If you guys know my family, my oldest son is 6'4". We have the giant children. Anyway. And they said he's the most likely to trip over his paws as
That's
he's
awesome.
running around. So I am so excited. So that is my highlight of the week. But Dan, I don't want to neglect you. You're important too. So what is your highlight of the week?
Well, that's a good question. I've really, let's see if I have a highlight. I've been doing a lot of reading and writing and working on projects, and so I'm pretty boring. That's the thing is
You're not boring.
I am. That's all I do is read and write and work on those types of projects. So I will be doing something summary here soon though. I'll probably go to the lake and just sit and stare at the water and listen for the loons and stuff like that. So.
Absolutely.
Someday, when you ask me that question, I will blow your mind with how exciting my life has become. So,
I have no doubt that you will. And I just want to say, to your credit, people, when Dan says he's just been sitting around reading and researching and all, that's why we have a MuseCast. That's why we have these sermon series, because Dan is contributing to the series, which in turn lead to this conversation that we have. So don't let him fool you. He's
Right.
about the business. He is
That's right.
about the business.
It's an
So,
honor. It is. It
um,
is. It's an honor to be
yeah,
a part of these series and to do research and to work with Greg and Paul and the team and you and everybody. So I consider it a great honor and a blessing to be a part of it. And I take it seriously and I love it. So that's good.
yeah. And it's much appreciated work. Also, you guys, we are so excited about what's coming up in August. Our big summer get together weekend, where hopefully you guys, many of you guys, are able to come in and we could all be together, like physically. So we're super excited about that, and we're planning for that. But at the same time, literally at the same time, we're like rolling out stuff for fall, which is huge for us. So we've got a lot going on. You may not always see it just yet, but we got a lot going on, and that man is a huge part of it all. So we are thankful, Dan, for you.
What's weird is we've been thinking it's coming up in August, and we have the whole weekend of activities, and there's so many things that we're doing, and but I gotta confess, I have a serious problem, because all I can think about for that whole weekend of events is beating Danny Churchill at beanbag toss. That's all I care about, is I need to try to defeat Danny Churchill. So I seriously, I have a problem. So yeah, we'll see.
It's a holy moment that Dan is gearing up toward. A holy moment of redemption, revenge, whatever you want to call it.
That's right.
Beanbag toss. Some call it cornhole, but it's serious business. You guys keep Dan in your prayers about that.
Indeed.
All right. But leading up to this big weekend, we still are in this series. And you may think, what more could we say? Well, clearly there is more to be said. And this weekend, Greg talked to us about getting off our high horse.
Yeah.
How apropos.
Yeah, it was a great sermon. And this sermon is interesting because there's actually two sermons. He did a twofer this weekend, but then also, even within these twofers, he had a lot of little rabbit trails that he kind of went down, that I just thought some of the best gems were in those little rabbit trails. And so I think what I'm going to try to do, like, it makes it really great to listen to as a sermon, but it makes it really hard to do a summary for. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to just summarize the best I can, and I'll probably leave some of the rabbit trails for maybe we could talk about afterward. But the first kind of sermon one, he looked at this idea that he pulls from 1 Corinthians 13. Yes. This idea that love never ends, and this idea that love is eternal, and really only love is eternal is sort of the key there, because Paul talks about how, like, hope is not eternal, because at some point we will be at the place and be with God, and we will experience all the things that we've already hoped for. They will be there. So there is no more hope, because there's just actuality. And so really, out of all of these great things, the only thing that really is eternal from now until the end is the love that we make, and the love that we participate in, and the love that we create. And he takes from this, I think, is a really great teaching. It'd be a really good nugget if he were a guest on the MuseCast. But his nugget in this first sermon is that if this is the only thing that lasts, then this is the most meaningful thing that we can invest ourselves into. And so he kind of talked about it like the analogy he uses is this airport security, where you have to pass through this gate, and there's certain things that are not accepted, and there's certain things that are accepted. And obviously, if you're going to take a trip, you need to bring things that will get through the gate, and you need to leave things alone that won't go through the gate. And so what he says is that love is what goes through this gate, and everything that can go through this gate into God's kingdom, those are the things that we should focus on. And I just think that's a great teaching. And the takeaway from that is that we should be asking ourselves, how can I be the most loving version of myself that I can be? And I just think that's a great kind of platform for which to move on to the rest of his teaching. And so that brings us into the second sermon. And the idea in the second sermon is that he talks again about judging, and he talks about how when it comes to judging, we should let go, let God. There's a lot of things that I think Christians will say, let go, let God for, that maybe it's not something that we should let go, let God. Some things God wants us to do. That's why he gave it to us as a responsibility. Like, for instance, taking care of the earth and the animal kingdom. That was our task. And so when we say, no, let go, let God, God's just going to say, no, I gave that to you. That's something that you need to do your part on. Love is another one that's something that we need to do. Judging, though, is not something. And it's funny how we tend to get everything flipped. We tend to do all the judging, and we have a really hard time loving the thing that we are supposed to do. And the one thing that we're not supposed to do, we just trip over ourselves doing all day, all the time. And so Greg says that we should kind of flip that instead. He talks about how, again, agreeing with God that everyone we meet is worth Jesus dying for. But he talks about one of the things that people can infer from this teaching that is sort of a faulty way of kind of taking this teaching is to say that if I'm not supposed to judge, then people shouldn't judge me also. And a lot of times we can use that to kind of insulate ourselves from being kind of corrected or being challenged. It's sort of like in this idea of iron sharpening iron, it's sort of like this big padding around ourselves so that we can't get sharpened. And so if someone were to say something to us, we'd say, well, you can't judge me. And people have actually used Greg's name to say, well, Greg says that da 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 da, and then they can go on living their just self-destructive happy life. And what Greg says is that, yeah, it's true that we shouldn't judge people in general, but if we are in a relationship with people, that is a place where it's appropriate to judge. In fact, what Greg says is that we really should be having relationships where we have people in our lives who can discern whether or not we're moving toward Christ-likeness or away, or maybe we're doing something that's destructive, and we should have people in our lives to speak to that. And so what he says is that, it's true that we shouldn't judge, but definitely we should also be in a place where we help other people with discerning, and we should be in a place where we've invited people in to discern in our life. And so that's how he kind of closes the sermon, as he asks us, who have you invited into your life to speak into your life? Because it's so important to have people, because we can't see our own blind spots by definition, and we might not see the damage or the destruction or the negative kind of consequences of how we're living or how we're thinking or whatever. And so we really need other people to do that. And I think there's a couple rabbit trails too that I want to get to, but that's sort of a summary. There's a lot more to it, but what did you think of the sermon in general?
Yeah, so I'm going to respond to that question. What did I think of the sermon in general? Which in a way is always responding to your summary as well. And then I think, Dan, let's see what some of these rabbit trails were that spoke to you. So first and foremost, my thoughts on the sermon is again, I always take this teaching that we've been in as a challenge, not to beat myself up, but to really examine my heart. And two things, because it was a twofer. Now, I love a good twofer when we do these at Woodland Hills, and notoriously they are Greg Boyd who delivers the twofers. And then at the same time, I think, holy buckets, how are we going to deal with all of this on the MuseCast on Tuesday when you have a twofer? So I will say from the first part of the sermon, the takeaway for me is how am I loving well? And I literally write it down, like the people in my life that I routinely interact with, and that's of course, my husband, the people in my home, my husband and my kids, and then my community, my friends, those people that I feel like God has brought into my life. How am I loving them well? And I spend time reflecting, okay, this situation came up. How did I love well? This conversation came up. How did I love well? And how did I love well for me? I don't know about for you. Inevitably leads to how did I love not so well? Where did I miss the mark? How could I have loved better? And again, it's not it's not a tool to beat myself up. It's just like a reflection time, just to kind of gauge how I am doing. And then for the second part of the twofer, let go, let God. It is so important that I remember who God is and who God is not. And who God is not is me, and my thoughts, and my opinions, and my assessments. And that can be difficult. And then secondly, and this is something you and I have both talked about, just the importance of having those people in your life that can say, because I love you, I want to show to you how you're not being like Jesus. And I say that it's important because it is. And I say that it can be difficult because it can be. Because I have this innate thing within me, and I've said this before, that I want to go, you're not the boss of me. Like, you're not the boss of me. Oh, man. But the beauty of allowing people to enter into your life to say, because we love you, Shawna, and because we know that you strive to be more Christ-like, we want to show you areas in which that's not so. Whew, very humbling, but very vital. So I don't know if that was just like a Cliff Notes version of your summary. However, I will say that was truly what I gathered and gleaned from the sermons.
That was great. It's good. In fact, if it was a Cliff Notes version of my summary, it was a lot more from the heart, not from the notes like I do. So that was probably it's basically like an animated version of the skeleton that I shared. So it was very good. But there are a couple things that Greg really pulled out from this that, and he said this in the sermon. It's like, this is the value of going over a text for a long period and just dwelling there for a while, because we find things that are not obvious the first time you read through it. And so one of the things that he talked about is he said that, when you read verses 4 and 5 of chapter 7, Jesus says this, how can you say, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from the other person's eye. Now, he says this right after verse 3. In verse 3, he says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in someone else's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your eye? So there's two levels here. That first level is just about awareness. It's just about making a judgment. It's just about like seeing it. The second level is when you take the next step to go and try and help. And it's interesting because so often we have done this for multiple weeks. We've looked at this as a text about judging, but it's also a text about meddling. It's also a text about getting involved in other people's lives, and the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it. And so when Jesus says, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you can see better to help, that's implying that there are times when it is okay to help another person with what they have in their eye. And it's just that you can't do it in a hypocritical way. You have to do it in a way that's full of integrity. And so that is just like, it's a very nuanced kind of notice, observation by Greg on this text. And I just think it's so important as part of how we understand this. So, yeah.
Yeah. To that point, I want to say, it keeps going back to something you said, I don't know in what week, Dan, and I believe it was on the MuseCast, where you said, this is all about our heart posture. It truly is all about our heart posture. As we invite others into our lives to help us be better bearers of light, and as we are invited into others' lives to speak into the things that are happening in their life, it's all about our heart posture. And if we are so busy and getting full of ourselves with like pointing out everybody else's speck, even if we've been invited in, I don't know that that's the most fruitful approach for us. Whereas if we are tending to what's happening in our own life, because we've all got stuff, while at the same time in humility helping another brother or sister grow by pointing out something they may not see, I think that's beautiful. There's a difference in doing it from a point of, I know better than you, I am better than you, I am above the situation and I'm pointing this out to you. That's different than saying, I love you and this is what I'm noticing. Let's talk about this. Heart posture makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's good. The other thing that he says, I wanted to do this too. That he titled the sermon "Getting Off of Our High Horse," and the reason why he says that is because when this idea of the knowledge of good and evil and participating in the knowledge of good and evil in kind of like the ancient Near East, the kings were sort of the source of what is right and wrong, and so they were sort of the go-to source to determine right and wrong. And an interesting thing about that is not only were they the determiners of right and wrong, but they were sort of immune to anybody judging them that they were doing something right or wrong. Very convenient position to be in. Right.
What a gig, man.
It's a good gig if you can get it. But what's interesting about that is that a lot of times when we judge, we can set ourselves up in the same way, where we're judging other people, but as soon as somebody judges us, we say, you can't judge me, and we get all righteous about that. And so we sort of insulate ourselves in the same sort of morally shallow way that these kings would. And so that's where Greg gets this idea of get off your royal horse, get off your high horse, and be humble again. And part of that is to invite people, instead of protecting yourself from other people's judgments, invite the right people in to judge. And he highlights that like there's over 50 times in the New Testament where this phrase one another it comes up. And I wish I had the Greek. I forgot to do a Greek search for it, but this phrase comes up about, and it's things like love one another and build up one another, and there's all these things. And so it implies it's really important to do all of these things in a relationship with one another, and that's sort of part of what humility is just recognizing the kind of our interconnectedness, and that we are all brothers and sisters, and that is when we can speak into each other's lives in a way that builds up instead of tears down, instead of reinforcing a hierarchy. It's only in this one another kingdom of God, body of Christ, brothers and sisters sort of community that now judgment or discernment and speaking into one another, that actually builds people together and up and more toward Christ likeness. And so it was those are the other rabbit trails, but I love that point about the king and the high horse.
Yes, that was such a great point that he made. And what I love about it too is how it ties back to something we always seem to circle back to, which is community and connectedness. And he even talked about friendship, spiritual friendship. And when we did that series on spiritual friendship, we talked a bit about the one anothering, how very vital it is to one another, each other. And a king doesn't one another. The king, it's a one-way situation. The king sits there on their high horse with all the knowledge and all the wisdom and all of the rules and all the protection that role affords. And they just, dole out the edicts. When you one another, it's like you give and I receive, and I give and you receive. It is one anothering. So it's praying for one another, forgiving one another, admonishing one another, challenging one another, encouraging one another. I mean, there are a ton of one another verses. And so I love that was brought up into it. And it leads me to a question, Dan, and this is where the rubber meets the road per se, because I do think that part of what we do here on the MuseCast is yes, we continue that conversation from Sunday's sermon, but we also kind of bring it down to brass tacks. Like, how does this play out in the real world? In the year of our Lord, 2022, how do these things play out? And so I want to ask you, have you had those people in your life where you've had that one anothering relationship, where you've submitted yourselves to them and they've submitted themselves to you to really admonish and encourage one another?
Yeah, I have. In fact, probably I really leaned on that a lot in my own life because, kind of coming from a broken family and I really
Mm-hmm.
kind of found connection at church, and I found these people who I kind of looked at as someone who could help me become, back then it wasn't to become more Christ-like, it was just to understand the world, I was just lucky to have good discernment to pick people who were very spiritually healthy and so forth. But yeah, I actually have, and I can even remember, and I still, some of these conversations that I've had with other believers who I consider kind of in my spiritual family, I can still remember things that they have spoken about me,
Yeah.
meant to kind of illuminate kind of flaws or strengths or whatever. I still vividly remember some of these conversations from 33 years ago, and I still think about some of these conversations. And so it's just that, I can't see, where I'm lacking, because if I could see where I was
Yeah.
lacking, then I wouldn't be lacking there. I would be, but other people can. And so
Yeah.
I just think it's invaluable. So yes, I have, and I'm very grateful for all of those. And I
Yeah.
continue to have that still today. And I just think it's invaluable. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think the key for me has been because, and I'm sure you could say the same, I've had it both ways. I've had it where I've had people in my life that lovingly, and lovingly doesn't always mean soft or sweet, right? Like lovingly doesn't always mean if you want to. Sometimes lovingly is, hey, are you aware of this? This is what I'm seeing. What do you have to say about that? Sometimes lovingly is like, okay, this completely contradicts everything I know about you and everything that you say that you stand for. So let's just be clear on that. Lovingly is sometimes truth shroud in that grace and boldness to let you know what's what. All of that to say, yes, I have had those people in my life. And even I'm going to let you know, sometimes those people are my children. Sometimes those people are people who are what you would consider peers, or those you would consider that you are mentoring, or someone that you feel like you're further along with. Like that's the beauty of the kingdom of God, is anyone that we allow to be in our life can be a tool for wisdom and to shine a light on something that we're not seeing. And it absolutely has been my kids at times. And those moments have been some of the biggest aha God moments for me. And I've also had it where it wasn't invited and it wasn't loving, and the motive I'm not so sure of. And you can definitely feel the difference. And the impact it has on me is definitely different. And so this may be a rabbit trail, a little bit of its own, but in that regard, I am wondering, as we're talking about this, how many folks have had those negative experiences and therefore don't see the value in having that camaraderie of people speaking into your life. They've had those negative experiences of someone just coming in and lambasting them, or saying things harshly, or speaking things over them, almost like, in a negative curse like manner. And I just want to be clear, that's not what we're talking about. That's unhealthy. And there's a lot of things that have been spoken to us and over us that we need to forget, and that we need to like come out from under, because it doesn't reveal Jesus's character. So that's not what we mean. We don't mean rolling over people and butchering people with our truth. What we mean is lovingly saying, this is who you are, and this is who God says you are, but this is what's being reflected. Do you think that they are the same? And that can look a million different ways, but it should never be like you're left in a bloody heap in the middle of the road.
People wouldn't know this by looking at you, but you are very violent in like underneath the surface. A lot of your there's a darkness under there, I tell you.
Yeah.
A bloody heap on the road. A bloody heap on the road. Okay.
Yeah, I got to keep those things in check. However, do you understand what I'm saying? That
Absolutely, yeah.
there is a difference, right?
Yeah. Well, and especially now too, where everything is so, of course, politicized, and so a lot of times when someone comes to correct, it's more about them than it is about me, and you start to pick that up, like, okay, this guy, he might be right about what he's saying, but he or she cares way too much about this. I mean, it's an issue, sure, and maybe he or she is right, but it's not that big of an issue, and so that you have to deal with that too. Sometimes people bring their own stuff when they're discerning, your life and your walk with God, and so yeah, I agree.
We did have a question come in as we're talking about judgment, the knowledge of good and evil, and speaking into right and wrong, and it has to deal with Adam and Eve and their revelation of their nakedness. Do you want to go there, Dan? Or
let's do it.
Have another? Okay. Well, I'm going to pull it up because I didn't memorize it. I'm so sorry. Okay. I'm just going to read it. Is that okay?
Yep, go for it.
All right. Once Eve and Adam ate the forbidden fruit, they knew they were naked. How does realizing that you are naked equate with being? How does knowing good from evil cause you to want to cover your nakedness? For that matter, if eating from the tree is all about how we learned to form judgments about people and things, how would that explain the garden couple's first move being, let's clothe ourselves? Yeah. So how does all of that lend to everything we're talking about today?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I do talk about that a little bit in Confident Humility, but I think maybe, and there's a lot of different angles, but one thing I would say right away is that it's interesting that oh, hold on, I'm losing internet here. Okay, I think it's good, but one thing I would say is that the temptation originally had to do with, Eve comparing herself to God, and the serpent kind of convincing Eve that God was holding out on her, and that she could be so much more, and that God was denigrating her by keeping her down at the level that she was at. And so all of the temptation revolved around this up and down hierarchy type things, and this kind of this attack on the supposed attack on Eve's dignity, and so that up and down, and I'm not as good as them, and all of that, that is what judgment is about. Judgment, even though you, on the face of it, you say, boy, that person is, let's say, overweight. That's the judgment, like the text of the judgment. But the power of the judgment is that person is less than that person, because that person is overweight or too tall or too skinny or whatever it is. That denigrates them somehow. That's what's really going on underneath the surface there. And so when Adam and Eve eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they are embracing a mouthful of this idea that some people are better than others. And that means that now suddenly, once they've taken a bite out of that kind of ideology, now suddenly it matters how they look. It matters how people see them. And they don't want to be judged like that, and so they cover themselves, and that's really kind of what shame and arrogance is. Shame and arrogance is just either feeling denigrated or feeling superior in this realm of hierarchy. And so that is the connection between covering themselves and realizing they were naked. They didn't realize they were naked before that, because it's like, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all God's creation. This is great. But as soon as you open your mind to the possibility that you might not be good enough, or that some people are better than others, now suddenly it matters how people see you, because it puts you on that hierarchy somewhere. So that, to me, is the connection. And I think it's so profound, and I think humanity is still unpacking the profundity of this story and this teaching.
I totally agree. Absolutely. I think people do not realize, and by people I mean we, all of us, we don't realize we can think we're making a statement or an observation about another person, but it's so loaded. It is never just a simple statement.
That's right.
It's a statement with a bunch of nuance and descriptors and, you know, a lot of indicators lying underneath.
That's
and
right.
Those are our judgments, right? Like, it's never just person A is blank. Nope. Person A is blank, and therefore B, C, D, E, F, G. You know, that's just the way that it goes. And then we determine whether or not all of those descriptors are good or bad or worthy or vile. You know what I mean? And so I think that's, again,
and we never say the therefore. Yeah, we never say the therefore. We just we say the first part. The therefore is implied.
Yeah.
And what that allows us is it allows us to have spiritual plausible deniability. I was just saying that they were tall. That's all I was saying. It's like no,
that's all I said.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you were saying more than that. So
yeah, absolutely. Yep. Which is, again, so important to have people to say to us, no, Shawna, that's not all you were saying. What you're really saying is blah, blah, blah. So right. Yeah. All right, Dan, I can't, I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, there's no way. But
is it time?
It's time. It is nugget time.
All right. You know, I think I wrote an article, just a blog post a few weeks ago, and it really relates to this idea that love is the only thing that's eternal. And I related it to creativity. And it's funny because the last sermon I gave, I got a bunch of comments on the whchurch.org website for my sermon, but a lot of the comments were about this article that I wrote. It wasn't even about the sermon. So, which is funny. It's like, I don't even know if anybody watches the sermon. I don't know what that came from. But anyway, the blog post, I basically said that, you know, a lot of times we tend to exalt creativity as this, you know, amazing thing. And really, what I argue in this blog post is that creativity isn't really even real. And it's just sort of like, it's this pre-existent potential. There's nothing really creative that we create, like from painting or writing or whatever. Like, for instance, let me just say, like, one of my favorite haikus is, writing can be tricky, especially transitions. Raccoons eat crickets. So that's one of my favorite haikus. And when I wrote that, that just made my day. And I love this haiku, except that haiku has always existed as a possibility. It's just that collection of words that I slapped together. It was always possible. It was always existing out there in the realm of possibility. I'm just the lucky dope who put those words together for the first time. And so it's not really even something I created. I just transitioned it from possibility from probability or possibility to actuality. However, how I treat someone, that is something that only I can create. That is the only thing that I can truly create, is how I treat someone. And so even if you're an artist or a musician or whatever, that helps me at least to see that as much fun as I have with haikus and poetry, the only real creative thing I do is how I treat one another. And for me, it helps me take creativity off of its pedestal. It's not an idol. It's fun. But the real thing that we should be pursuing is loving one another. And so that's my nugget.
I love it. My nugget is tied to your nugget, although not as creatively. Or I will just say, love never ends. And if that is the one thing that stands at the very end of it all, that's what I want to be putting in my bucket, right? Like, those are the eggs that I want to be putting in that basket. Like, there could be a whole lot of other things that we can agree to disagree on, that we can agree on, that we can have differing opinions. There's a whole lot in this world that we can either agree about and walk together in, or disagree about and still walk together, but just having differing opinions. But at the end of the day, love is what will last. Love is the only thing that is sustaining. And so as much as possible, I am challenging myself to put my eggs in that basket, to put my mindset there, to put my actions there. What does it matter if I'm right or wrong about 18 million things that I have to decide upon in this world if none of it has anything to do with love?
Yep.
Right?
Amen.
So I'm just trying to filter my life and my thoughts and my actions through that. Like, the only thing that's going to matter in the end is love. And so how can I love well? How can I be challenged to love well? How can I receive love well? Because that is what is going to be the thing that makes me most compatible with the things of God.
Yep.
So not easy, but that's what matters.
Yep, that's right.
All right. Did we get it done, Dan?
I think we got it done, you know?
I think we got it done. Good news is we'll be back here next week. So if there's something that we left out or something else that comes up in another message, we get to talk about it all over again. So tune in. Don't miss out. And remember, we're on podcasts too. And we do love getting your questions. So musecast@whchurch.org. Please send those in. And don't forget, Dan and I are live on Tuesday afternoons chatting with you as you watch the Musecast. It's a miracle. We're like being broadcast and we're also talking to you. Yeah. Go figure. So
we're amazing. We're amazing.
We're so great. We're wonderful. All right. Thank you guys.
Speaking of humility.
Right. We're so humbly wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. Tune back in next week as we continue the conversation from the Sunday sermon. We really do appreciate you guys. If you can't tell, we have a great time discussing this stuff with you all. So thank you for being a part of this community. Have a great week.